Hello everyone and welcome back to Seeker's Corner. I am very happy to get back to part 2 of Don Blackwell's attempt to prove that dinosaurs really did exist. Today we are starting with him trying to argue that a fire-breathing dinosaur actually did exist despite all evidence to the contrary, and then we're going to move into some really poor examples of evidence. I believe he started with the Bible because the evidence he's going to show us is only convincing if you believe the Bible is literally true. I've skipped ahead a little bit, and then so we can get straight into the fire-breathing Leviathan, and then can't skip over things like, ooh, Leviathan's name is, well, a name, and stuff like that. Alright, so we're going to get started. If you want to get caught up to where we are, part 1 should be as a card and in the description, assuming I can get the cards to work. Here we are moving forwards into the thing. We're going to skip over some bits of the reading of the description because really it's just like, oh, he breathes fire and he breathes more fire. But there's some parts that are important because he's going to make some comparisons that just don't fit the description.
And his eyes are like the eyelids of morning. Out of his mouth goes burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. You see what he's describing here? This large creature, when he snorts or he sneezes, he says he blows fire out of his mouth.
Pay attention to this, because it is describing fire, but he's going to compare it to something that's not nearly as fiery as it sounds in the description.
His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. If you weren't reading the Bible and someone handed you a book, a fairy tale book, and you read this description, what would you conclude that he's describing for us here?
A fictional creature. Wait, is that what you wanted me to say?
I think I would say, well, that sounds like a fire-breathing dragon. Now, somebody would say, that's absolutely absurd.
Yep.
Now, some people translate this as a crocodile. Some people say, well, this is a crocodile. Have you ever...
Let's stop here and take a moment to consider why people would say it's a crocodile. First of all, it's blatantly obvious this is super heavily mythicized. Whatever it is, it's not a real creature. Second, well, crocodiles aren't horrible, and I'm going to show you the best verse I'm aware of for that. First of all, it's obvious that this is hugely mythical in general. Second of all, he make it, well, that's in the King James Version, but we'll look at it anyways. He maketh the deep boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of... He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. So basically, it's just talking about how he makes the sea boil and roll. Now, if you really had to point to a real-life creature that does this, you would point to a crocodile, because when they catch prey, they do those barrel rolls, which causes the sea to churn up. This is one of the reasons why people who think the Leviathan is a sea crocodile that's been turned to pure myth will point to. And we'll see right here, see how he just spins around and creates a huge boil of boiling water, basically. And the argument here is that this is what is being described by the boiling sea there in verse 31, was it? 31. Now, I personally don't think this is a great argument for what the Leviathan is, but I don't think it's a terrible one either. However, I wanted to point it out because Don Blackwell's being very uncharitable with how he is handling contrary beliefs. And this is just a good way of showing that. Alright, let us get back to him.
Ever seen a crocodile sneeze or snort and blow fire out of his mouth? I'd be afraid of that crocodile. I've never seen anything like that before. Some people would say that, the idea of a dinosaur-like creature that can actually breathe fire or snort fire, they would say that's just fairy tale. You people that believe the Bible and you think that's real, that is just crazy.
So before he moves on, I just want to point out how hilarious it is that he is talking as if the idea of a fire-breathing dragon being a mythical creature in the Bible is utterly ridiculous. But the Greeks traded a lot by sea, and so they could have influenced people. Why is this important? Well, let's just talk about other fire-breathing monsters. There's a lot of them, and we know that dragons are very much a Western thing, but we have a whole bunch of Greco-Roman mythology which shows fire-breathing stuff. We have I don't know what that is. There were 2 fearsome bulls which breathe fire. I don't know how to pronounce that. I probably should have looked it up, but whatever. The one I like the most because it's just so weird It's one of the tales of Hercules. We have the mares of Damascus, which is like evil horse things which sometimes breathe fire, depending on the tales you look at. Why talk about this? Because fire-breathing things are very common in the Mediterranean mythology. And these are just 3 I picked up off of Wikipedia in like 5 seconds. It's not like it's that hard to come up with examples. While Don might sound like he finds this absurd, it's not that unusual for fire-breathing mythical creatures to exist, and even fire-breathing versions of real animals to exist, like those fire-breathing horses. When he acts like people think he's crazy for believing in the Bible, what people think he's crazy for is believing that the Bible was describing an actual fire-breathing creature.
God has given us a lot of creatures that have some very interesting defense mechanisms, has he not? If you think about something that is more common to us, consider the skunk. The skunk has the ability to spew out this scent, this odor that is just repulsive to someone. Think about...
But it's just an odor. It's not fire. We'll get into how silly a fire-breathing anything is, but it's not comparable.
The electric eel. This creature has the ability to generate electricity in his body so that he can shock someone. I wonder if this earth...
Electricity in his body? Yeah, but we know how to produce electricity organically. It's called muscles and nerves. I mean, and also, electricity is not fire. Also note, the electric eel is a water creature. If it tried to breathe fire, there would be some problems.
Continue to exist for another 5,000 years, and the electric eel went extinct, and mankind came and found a fossil of an electric eel, and maybe they found some writings about the electric eel, and someone said there used to exist a creature that could actually generate electricity in his body, and he could shock other animals with this creature. Would some people, or with this ability, would some people say, that is fairy tale, that is nonsense?
So no, future generations won't be confused by the electric eel, probably because they will find something similar to this. This is a fact sheet put out by the University of Western Australia. It is on electric eels. It explains exactly how they work, in a more simplified fashion, of course, but good enough for our purposes by a long shot. Contains hundreds of thousands of modified cells called electrocytes, and it actually has 3 organs that can produce different quantities of electric discharge for various reasons. For hunting prey or fighting off threats, to even using electric charges to sense its environment. Very, very impressive, but they're clearly modified muscle cells. The reason I'm pointing this out is because he's completely ignoring the fact that if it was possible for a animal to breathe fire, we have evidence of it, and we just don't. And he doesn't even give half decent evidence of of fire. I just thought this particular bit of interesting information was also worth pointing out. Instead of relying solely on gills, like most fish, electric eels must surface every few minutes to breathe air. They have lungs, and they must breathe air as well as use their gills. It allows them to survive in oxygen-poor waters. Seems like a natural thing for something to adapt to. Just throwing it out because I thought it was very interesting.
Examples of animals today that have abilities similar to this. One of them,
no, we don't.
If you think about the bombardier beetle, that was mentioned in the Strongs a moment ago.
Okay, before we go too far into this, I want to point out this image right here. Where is the fire? Where is the light? This is clearly just exothermic reaction, which produces a lot of heat and boils some chemicals to create this thrust. If you were describing this in flowery, poetic language, it would be breathing steam, or boiling water, or a scalding breath. You wouldn't describe lights or flames, because this wouldn't create flames, nor would it kindle coals, as the Bible says at one point. This is clearly a distinctly different process than what is being described.
Peroxide. When it is threatened, he squirts these chemicals into a tube in the rear of its body. There are two enzymes that are added. There is a catalyst and periodase. These two chemicals mix together, and what happens is they're heated up instantly at the combination to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and he shoots out a fiery gas at his enemy.
Does that look fiery to you? Seriously, it's not fiery. He's trying to make it sound worse than it is. And we don't have to go anywhere. He has a picture of a non-fiery steam being shot out here. He's just grasping at straws. And we'll get deeper into this as he makes some even greater assertions.
That's a little small beetle. Could such a thing exist on a larger scale? If it did, you know what you would have?
A lot of steamy gas. Just saying.
What if it existed in the size of a dinosaur? You know what you would have? You would have a fire-breathing dragon. It
wouldn't be breathing fire, and it wouldn't be producing light. Thus, lanterns and sparks would not show up in the description of it. Even if you can scale it up, which I don't know if you can.
A little tiny beetle that exists today could do such a thing. Why could God not do this with an animal that has now become extinct? And imagine...
Well, God could, given that he can do anything he wants and is the ultimate solution to all sorts of silly things. But, you know, there's no evidence of it.
The difference in scale. There is a type of dinosaur that has been found that actually has hollow chambers in its head. And some have speculated, what are these for? Some have thought, could this be a defense mechanism whereby he could spew these chemicals and have something very similar to the bombardier beetle? Very well could be.
Very well could be. Notice there's no citation. There's no name of what creature we're talking about. There's no way of even looking this up. And yet I tried. First up is this. This is the... I knew it. Parasaurolophus? I don't remember. I looked it up. I promise I did. It's not a family. It's actually a clade of dinosaurs. I don't know what its actual... I don't think this has one of the easily named levels. But the points is here. The most notable feature is the cranial crests, which protrude from the rear of head and is made up of two types of bones. The crest is hollow with distinct tubes leading from each nostril to the end of the crest before reversing direction and heading back down the crest and into the skull. This is basically a skull with a hugely long nose tunnel for, no reason that I really have information for. But you're not going to be breathing out gaseous or liquid flammable chemicals out of your nose holes. That could do some terrible things to your lungs. So it can't be this. My next thing is this article in Science, which I'm not going to go deep into because it suggested that the T-Rex has these holes in its head. These are likely thermal cavities similar to what alligator skulls had. Too far from the jaw to do much of anything else. I could actually go deeper and look it up, but I don't need to. Why? Because Don Blackwell hasn't given us enough information to even look up his claims. Some dinosaurs have holes in their head. No kidding. We couldn't find exactly what he was talking about. But then there's also this. What we have found are land-dwelling creatures, not sea-dwelling creatures. And the Bible talks about a massive sea-dwelling creatures. Here, let me show you. Here in verse 25, this is better. The mighty are afraid of his rising. They are beside of themselves from the crashing. So the Bible says he's so big that when he rises out of the water, the mighty are beside themselves with the force at which he falls back in. Does this sound like a swimming T-Rex to you? No, it doesn't. And that is very much the problem. These two dinosaurs clearly aren't what this is talking about. If we're taking Job so literally here that the Leviathan has to breathe fire, then it's also got to be a sea-dwelling creature that is so big that it causes fear and terror. Ironically, none of what I've been searching would align with this. And we also got to point out, if this is a water creature that can breathe fire, why on earth can't it breathe fire? To satellite wooden boats? So are we saying God created a creature capable of breathing fire who only has one goal, and that is to attack humans? I mean, it would kind of fit with the Old Testament God, but I'm pretty sure Don Blackwell wouldn't like to say that about his God. After all, any water-dwelling creatures you tried to breathe fire at would just probably die laughing, which, that might work. In my digging, I did manage to find this particular article. It's done by Philip J. Senator, who is a PhD in dinosaur biology, basically, which is pretty cool. I would love to spend just half the video going through this particular article, but we have many, many more claims to get to, so we'll just do this right quickly. Specifically, I want to take a look at this image right here, which points out some of the problems with this particular method of fire breathing. If it was some sort of gaseous chemical that you were breathing out to explode, no matter how you ignited it, it would still surround your head because gases diffuse in all directions. And so you would fireball your own head if you were breathing fire this way. Or it'd be too small to be useful and you'd still burn yourself. Here it's pointing out that trying to create an electric current inside a living thing, which itself is conductive and even more conductive than air, would not produce a spark. Instead, the current would flow through the creature's flesh itself, which would cause issues. So what we have here is a fairly simple breakdown of how a dinosaur breathing fire is a bit silly. This entire article, however, goes into different types of gases that can do it, including methane, ignition by electricity, problem of trying to spark by friction, and even paired chemicals that explode, and every other kind of proposed fire-breathing individual I've ever heard of. So it's quite useful. The link to this is in the description, and if you want to read it for whatever reason, I would definitely encourage you to go look at it, especially if you're a fantasy author. If I sound a bit disappointed, it's because I am. I had a 15-minute long section just going over this. Instead, we're going back to Don Blackwell and his video. Hopefully, there isn't any more silliness, Leviathan silliness. Anyways,
I want to read to you an excerpt from a book by Dr. Dwayne Gish. Dr. Gish says the frequent references to dragons in the Bible, as well as the early records and traditions of most nations of antiquity, certainly cannot be shrugged off as mere fairy tale. Most, probably, they represent memories of dinosaurs handed down by tribal ancestors who encountered these dinosaurs before they became extinct. It would be very hard to believe that so many people, all over the world, from so many different places and cultures, could have come up with such similar stories and similar descriptions of such a thing that never existed.
Alright, so he has a quote from an expert. Let's make some predictions. This is a quote that sounds to be about history. So most likely this is an expert in history, right? Alright, so here is Dr. Dwayne Gish, PhD, creationist biochemist. So I won't fault you for citing someone who believes what you believe, but I will fault you for citing a biologist on history because, those two things have the same expertise, right? This is a fairly common, in my experience, problem with creationists in that they like to cite authorities that don't have any actual expertise in what they're citing them on. They'll cite biologists on geology and engineers on genetics, and here biologists on history. Find me a historian who believes dragons are part of our historical record, and then we'll talk. This is what is known as a false authority fallacy. So according to the American Psychological Association, a type of informal fallacy or persuasive technique in which it is assumed that the opinions of recognized expert in one area should be heeded in another area, also known as the expert fallacy. Basically, this is where we assume that because someone has expertise in one area, they must also have expertise elsewhere. And it's a form of faulty thinking. So we could just ignore everything that was just said. But I'm not going, because there's something else here that needs to be corrected. Notice how the quote is used. We just talked about dragons, and I said maybe they could have been real, and then let me quote you something from an expert. Dragons are memories of dinosaurs. Notice how Don Blackwell is using this to fill in the very well could be, which was his only support for dinosaurs as dragons, and this PhD expert agrees with me. It's a deceptive tool used to convince people that Don Blackwell is correct, even though he provided no evidence. Oh, this doctor agrees, then it must be true, despite the fact the doctor who agrees has no expertise in the history that he is claiming ownership of. It's incidents like this that convince me Don Blackwell and similar young Earth creationists are being deceptive. Whether they are deceiving themselves or everyone around them, I don't know. But why would you trust a biologist on history and not a historian? It just leaves a bad taste. And this sort of failure of honesty and reasoning should be pointed out every time you run across it.
Here's our second question. If dinosaurs did exist, the next obvious question would be when and where. Now, what do the evolutionists say? Man, dinosaurs 65 to 70 million years, man, 2 to 3 million years. So approximately 65 million years, they would say, would separate man from the dinosaurs. Brethren, I want to tell you something. A person cannot believe that and believe the Bible.
Notice he just made believing that man and dinosaurs lived millions of years apart will prevent you from being a good Christian and going to heaven. This seems to be two things that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. I am, however, not going to spend any more time on this because, well, I'm not a Christian and I don't believe the Bible anyways. So I just want to point out the oddity of this. Man and dinosaurs have to live together or you're going to hell. It just seems like a weird thing to believe.
When did he make dinosaurs? During that 6 days. When did the Lord make men? During that 6 days. And so, men and dinosaurs lived together on the earth. They had to.
Okay. I was going to skip all this, but then I remembered this little gem. Did dinosaurs and men live together? They had to. Don Blackwell has just tipped his hand. He believes that men and dinosaurs had to live together. There is no other possibility. Therefore, all the evidence he's going to show us will always be interpreted as men and dinosaurs living together. No other explanation is possible. None whatsoever. This is not a way to learn knowledge. Because what if you're wrong? What if you were never supposed to take those 6 days as being literal 6 days? After all, doesn't the Bible say, to God a day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years as a day? Shouldn't this tip you off that maybe God doesn't care about time the same way we do? I don't know why I'm arguing theology with Don Blackwell here, so we're going to move on. So if humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time, I'd expect something. While some artwork would be expected, I'd also expect written documents to have detailed explanations for various types of dinosaurs, not just one or two, and they need to be clearly dinosaurs, otherwise we'd have issue being certain what we're talking about. I'd also expect evidence of humans hunting dinosaurs. This is because humans have hunted everything that could possibly be used as meat, or hunted for status, or other sorts of things. Hence, big game hunting. For instance, we know humans have hunted proboscideans, the taxonomic clade, or grouping that holds both mammoths and elephants. This article, for instance, talks about the various types of evidence, direct and indirect, we have of the hunting of, well, I'm specifically going to focus on mammoths, but on mammoth and other proboscidean type animals. So if we come on down, direct archaeological evidence of hunting. Most archaeological indications of proboscidean hunting relate to projectiles and thrust implements found embedded in and or in direct association with elephant remains, or to the identification of injuries caused by thrust/thrown weapon. This location, a tip of a narrow slit stone point was found embedded in the right scapula of a young mammoth. So we found the tip of some sort of spear or thrown implement that was stuck in the bones of a mammoth. So then there was another one where baked stone implements were found with the remains of at least 86 mammoths indicating that the mammoths were the favored hunting prey of the nearby members of Homo. Of the 197 examined implements, 55 had presented a characteristic impact imprinted as the flint parts of thrown weapons. The implements were likely hefted and used in mammal hunting. Research suggests these tools were taken back by the hunters after hunts, while fragments of broken points remained inside the mammoth carcasses. In North America, proboscideans were found at several sites in association with bone points and stone projectiles, and were documented as being capable of killing modern elephants, suggesting they actually did the hunting. This is one I find very interesting. A projectile made of mastodon bone was found embedded in the rib of a mastodon. It's questioned, but it's kind of hilarious that a mastodon bone weapon was found as part of a mastodon. Why do I bring this up? Because this is the type of evidence I would expect if humans and dinosaurs were actually living together. Dinosaur bones with clear marks from weapons, like we showed here. But that's not what we're going to get. What we're going to get is poor evidence for the most part, and hopeful reasoning for the majority of it. Alright, let's see what the first thing he's going to give us is.
I want to read you an excerpt from another article. This is by William F. Dankenbrink. He writes this. He says, new evidence from the Paluxy riverbed in Glen Rose, Texas, as well as from South America, Mexico, California, Armenia, demonstrates beyond any doubt that dinosaurs and mankind coexisted and walked on the planet Earth at the very same time. It's interesting when I preach this, and that was interesting. But he continues, he says, believe it or not, dinosaur footprints and the footprints of man are found in the same strata, in the very same formation, in some cases only 18 inches apart at the geological dig in Glen Rose, Texas, called the Paluxy riverbed.
Alright, so here we have to look at something telling. This is Answers in Genesis, and they are a young Earth creationist group, and they have this to say. Given the ambiguity of the evidence, the fact that much of what may have once been present is no longer available for study, we do not believe the claims of coexistence of human and dinosaur prints are wholly supportable. So even a creationist organization dedicated to, what is their name? Is saying Paluxy River is not a good place. But this isn't the only thing we have to go on. This is Lori Godfrey of the University of Massachusetts. She works in anthropology. She does a lot of printing. But the important one for our discussion today is this over here. Notes of an Anatomist. So today we're just going to look at the claims for Central Texas footprints. This includes the Paluxy River Valley as well as a few others. It also notes that everyone agrees that in the 1930s there were several tracks that were carved to sell to tourists, but they insist that genuine footprints also exist there. So I'm not going to go through this paper in detail for time reasons, but much like the fire-breathing dinosaur ones, it's actually quite informative, though not nearly as interesting, because, footprints aren't my biggest jam. But first, we should note that it starts off, how do you tell what is a human footprint? Here we have the discussion of the creationist published accounts of these supposed human footprints. Problem is, some of them are erosional features that can only be noticed if they have painted water to show their human characteristics. Others have been destroyed by further excavation, dirt removal, or erosion. Some others are mostly under the water, even when the river is low, and no casts have been made available for human anatomists or anything like that, which leaves only the published field notes, measurements, and photographs to work with. However, I want to focus on the conclusion for time's sake. So here in the conclusion, we have a couple of important pieces of information. While there are excellent dinosaur tracks in Central Texas, all the Alange man tracks are miserable, suggesting that they really shouldn't be evaluated as man tracks due to the poor quality of the claim. When we approach the evidence this way, based on starting with the question, how do you tell if a track is made by man, the alleged man tracks, fail consistently the test of human origin, but often are of dinosaur origin easily. We consistently found these data to be shoddy, and even when taken at face value, to lead to absurd conclusions about stride length, and foot shape of the humans that presumably made them. The inescapable conclusion is that there is no footprint evidence in Texas supporting the notion of human and dinosaur contemporarity. Someone whose entire life is the study of ancient signs of human habitation takes a look at these footprints and comes away with, they're not human. Reports like this that have caused even the Answers in Genesis crew to dismiss these as poor evidence of anything useful, even if they believe they are human footprints.
I want to show you some pictures. I've got some pictures here, some paintings that have been found on caves and also on ancient canyon walls. And these
Instead of busting each individual piece of rock art, he's going to give us two here. I am going to look at the difficulties with just interpreting rock art correctly. We're going to take a look at each individual thing, and then I'm going to start talking about rock art in general.
Grand Canyon, and I don't know if you can see this here. Can you see the little drawing where the arrow is pointing? Can you make out what that is? This is on the wall of the Grand Canyon. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so that do they resemble each other? Looks a tremendous amount like a dinosaur. There are lots and lots and lots of these things, some of them dating back thousands of years. This is actually from a national monument in Blanding, Utah.
Now, my goal when dealing with this particular set of evidence is to argue that we don't know how to actually interpret what we are looking at. Artwork made by, presumably, people thousands of years ago in a culture that doesn't exist anymore, using an art form that lacks art history or a critical review of the art or any evidence of schools of artistic preferences and styles to compare and contrast to make any sort of educated guess about what the stylizations and conventions of this type of artwork. But we also are looking at a style of art that is perpetrated mostly by people who have other jobs. These would have been hunters and gatherers or very early farmers, unlike the modern versions of artists who can support themselves entirely on art. Thus, we have people with different backgrounds, different levels of expertise, and different viewpoints entirely looking at this. For support, I'm going to look at this guy. This guy is Robert J. Bernick. Here we are. He is a chaired professor at Canterbury University. He's in Australia. He's an expert on rock art, and he is also working in Australia, where they apparently have an indigenous population of people who currently do rock art. So he's right in the middle of the group of people who can do the most research on how this style of artwork is done. In 2013, he published this article in the Journal of Literature and Art Study. Alright, so here is his sort of abstract. This paper explores some of the myths that have been and still are being created about rock art. We know from the study of the last rock art producing peoples in the world that outsiders of their culture cannot interpret their rock art correctly, or even understand their cosmologies adequately. So he is arguing in this paper that outsiders cannot fully understand what is being depicted in the rock art, much less the cosmologies and views of the universe that led to those depictions. Here, only a few paragraphs in, most rock art traditions of the world are far from naturalistic in the modern European sense, but appear to be highly stylized, schematicized, or centralized, or conventionalized, I should say. Depending on the degree on which the culture departs from Eurocentric conventions, meaning tends to be inaccessible to cultural outsiders, including the modern scholar. So basically here he's saying, hey look, we really can't know what's going on. And as proof for this, he argues right here. The proof derives from the only blind test ever conducted in rock art interpretation. A distinguished professor who identified hundreds of painted biomorphs of Biswick Cave in Northern Territory, Australia. 20 years later, he discovered that the painters were still alive. So he took them to the site and asked them to explain the rock art imagery in detail in order to test his own expert interpretations. He concluded that he failed to diagnose correctly the individual painted items in 90% of the site's inventory. He stated that the mental code of the artists, schematization cannot be cracked without keys provided by highly initiated informants. And this has been the author's experience as well. And basically, here he's saying, look, there has been only one test up to 2013 where someone has attempted to identify rock art meanings and then later found the actual artist and checked his meanings against the actual artist's intentions. And it proved wrong. If we scroll down, we have something that shows how personal beliefs are sort of contradicted by the intentions of the interpreter. So this is a sketch of a rock art that was interpreted as this particular genus of birds, and it's specifically annotated to point out that this is likely a poor argument. First of all, the long neck is not from this intended genus, nor is the head shape correct. But there's also a complete lack of tail feathers intended. This is a likely not meant to be a naturalistic interpretation. Also notice the feet are pointed towards the observer rather in the direction of the creature is facing, also suggesting non-naturalistic views of the creature. This is clearly a bird. It's hard to be certain if this is intended to be a specific bird or a bird in general, especially as it appears to be an amalgamation of either multiple bird-like character traits or not intended for realistic interpretation. And as we go further down, we'll get to an example that's more on point. Depictions of dinosaurs in rock art. Most assertions of this nature come again from the United States, also the only part of the world, apart from Western Europe, where fakes of paleo art are common. In other words, most of the dinosaur rock arts come from the part of the world where the vast majority of the fake rock art exists. Now, I do not want to be arguing that correlation is causation. Just because most of the fake art comes from the same region as dinosaur art doesn't mean anything. But it does ask a very important question for the creationist argument that Don Blackwell is making. As we'll learn in two-part sections from here, Don Blackwell believes that all the dinosaurs died off after the flood. So why would cultures go all the way to America before leaving evidence of dinosaurs behind, but not leave evidence of dinosaurs behind in the much closer areas of the Middle East, in China, and Russia, or places like that? Why are all the rock art we have either from people post-flood who managed to trek across the entire world, or painted pieces of rock that managed to not wear away or erode during a global flood? This evidence, even if it was real, wouldn't support the creationist view of dinosaurs and people. Just wanted to put this one on the table. But we're going to skip the talk about the dinosaurs in particular and come all the way down to his conclusions. If rock art is to be studied credibly and scientifically, all falsities need to be purged from the discipline. That includes not only the types reviewed here, which were tested and rejected, but also those that are not tested because they seem reasonably at the time, reasonably in tune with the dominant dogmas. At this point, it becomes apparent that the task of turning this pastime into a science is it foreign? I wonder what this term means. Donating or related to a task that cannot be completed. The conclusion of this paper is, in order to turn rock art from a pastime to a science, it requires a long effort of removing dogma from the things, from the effect, from the science, basically. And he honestly believes it won't be completed, at least not in any meaningful timescale. So why talk about this? Well, it's fairly simple. For the first piece of rock art, do we think any one of these birds from North America could have been what was intended to be depicted? And it showed the long tail feathers because that was just the style of the time, or who knows? I honestly don't. And I'm fine with that. And we should never be afraid to say I don't know. After all, if it's the honest answer, it's the honest answer.
As a matter of fact, these are some figurines that have been found in Mexico. They have found, as I recall, the number's about 32,000 of these, and they date back about 3,000 years, somewhere to around 1,000 BC.
Well, these are the Acambaro, Mexico figurines. They're also a fairly well-known hoax. And I feel inclined to point out yet again, apparently his evidence is from almost literally the exact opposite side of the world from where Noah supposedly landed his ark. How did these figurines survive the flood again? Or, why did only these people on the wrong side of the planet decide to make figurines after spending months or years crossing the world? From what I can see, this the general region of our dinosaur figurines anyway. The problem is, the rest of my maps are not nearly as detailed, so the exact location isn't particularly necessary. So this is a map of dinosaur fossils in Mexico, and as you can see, they're all like up here. This is closer to Texas, I think, as well as along the coast. And then there's a couple down here, but that appears to be below, maybe? It's hard to tell, but and then we have this other section here, which seems mostly up here in Texas and California area, and a little bit down here, maybe below. Anyways, the point of pointing this out is it doesn't appear that there have been dinosaur remains found near where Don Blackwell's figurines have been found. And that is sort of suspicious. Why don't we have figurines up in this area, up here? Why don't we have figurines down here? He said 3,000 figurines in this one region, but none were found to be traded with people living elsewhere. None were found or stuff around here. If people were making figurines of things they actually saw, why did they only make them in places where they couldn't look at them personally? It's just strange. So from these things alone, the figurines are suspect, right? But there's one more. There actually is a paper that tried dating it. Sadly, this paper is behind a paywall, and I don't feel like spending money on Blackwell. But we do have the abstract, which shows that evidence offered that the figurines were fired shortly before they were found. Since it's behind a paywall, I can't check it myself, but it should be noted that it's out there. However, I will be pressing X to doubt on this one, for the memes, at least. Because they were found in a place that lacks evidence of dinosaurs actually having lived in the area, and there's no real evidence of dinosaurs being known to other groups. In fact, his next piece of evidence is so suspiciously fraudulent that there was a documentary about bad archaeology, actually about ancient aliens, that goes out of its way to bust the piece of evidence in the 70s, not long after that it was first popularized. In other words, the more evidence he shows that dinosaurs lived with people, the more questions we have about why don't we see them. Remember, dinosaurs don't appear to have been hunted at any point by humans, and we tend to hunt for trophies after all. Just ask the elephants. Also, notice the Pegasus here in the corner? I don't know why that's there. Maybe he thinks it's a dragon? Seems a little sus to be in this collage, right? Good grief, how did I not notice that originally? Whoopsies.
In fact, these are some figures, some artifacts that have been found. I don't know how well you can see these, but the one of
this slide is the only clue he gives you to looking up these things. What you'll find is that the Inca stones are split into two major groups, one of which are in actual museums and are considered authentic. The other group is owned by this guy, who is a surgeon. This is sort of a misleading title here. Anyways.
Yeah, see this. I forget the names of all of these dinosaurs, but this one at the bottom looks like Triceratops. Is that what you call it? This looks like a Triceratops. Can you see what that is on top? This is an article that's about 3,000 years old. 11,000 of these stones existed, like the one that we just showed you. The figurines, approximately 32,000 of those. These things have been found, these pictures and pictographs have been found all over the world.
He claims these things have been found all over the world. All of his evidence comes from America and Mexico, a region that's had a lot of people looking for this sort of evidence for a lot of time, right in the time period where it'd be the easiest to fake it, and when dinosaurs are a big deal. This is actually his last piece of evidence for the coexistence of dinosaurs and men. After this, he's going to get into some unrelated biblically stuff that I'll probably skip over. So let's take a look at this. This is a Nova documentary the case of ancient astronauts. Why are we going to something about ancient astronauts? Because these Inca stones also show open heart surgeries and telescopes that the Incas never apparently had. So the ancient alien guys like to cite it as proof of their stuff as well. We are going to look at a small portion of this documentary because it is relevant on the Ica stones, and I think the best way to show just how poor Don Blackwell's evidence is.
In Ica, Peru, von Daniken has discovered a museum containing a mysterious collection of engraved stones.
So, as you can tell from the quality, this is from the 70s, 1977 actually, and we're going to have to skip over good portions of it. But this is the exact same thing Don Blackwell was talking about. We'll see in a second.
The museum is owned by a local surgeon, Dr. Cabrera, who claims his collection is thousands of years old. It contains some very strange things indeed. Engravings on the stones show men gazing through telescopes at the stars, detailed maps of the world, and medical operations. Here, two surgeons bend over a heart transplant patient as they stitch up their incision. There, a local artist called Basilio makes a living out of carving stones for sale to tourists. His stones did indeed resemble those in Dr. Cabrera's museum. Basilio examined von Daniken's book in which the Ica stones appear.
He says that he has done these stones, and it confirms this one with the face of this stone. Sí.
Basilio said that these stones shown in von Daniken's book were among the first he made for Dr. Cabrera's museum, some 10 years ago.
Here we have the actual artist saying, I was the one who made these. Look at what's going on. Clearly these stones are forgeries. And the more you look into them, the clearer that becomes. And yet we still have Don Blackwell touting these as proof that dinosaurs existed with man. I don't know what's more insulting. That clearly 50-year-old debunked evidence is being presented, or that people are actually buying this type of stuff. This was an interesting journey for me, and I hope you enjoyed it with me as well. I know that last bit was a lot. The clips from the documentary didn't have much commentary for me, but I felt they spoke for themselves for the most part. Hopefully I didn't cut it up too much. At nearly an hour long, this is taking way too long to make, and I'll have to figure out a more efficient way to make videos, but I hope you're around for the next one. This is S3eker signing off. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment and a like, and possibly even subscribe. Thank you and have a nice day.